Welcome to our interview session here on bringing forward innovation for patients. My name is Alan Lovell. I'm part of a health team at Economist Impact, and I'm very pleased to have with me today Dejin Abidoye, Senior Vice President, Head of Oncology at Gilead Sciences. We are going to talk about pharma innovation, particularly in oncology, and the challenge of bringing transformative medicines to patients. So welcome, Dejin. Thank you for joining us today. We'll come on to transformative medicines in a moment, but we'll just start, if I may, with a personal question. You've only fairly recently come into the biopharma industry from academia. Why did you do that, and how are you finding the transition?
Sure. And thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being able to take this time to chat with you a little bit. Um, Talking about sort of my recent introduction to industry and to the pharmaceutical world. I trained at the University of Chicago in hematology oncology. And I think, a career spanning in terms of patient care spanning over a decade. Um, the remit has always been the same, which is to find new opportunities to help patients. Coming to industry is part of that journey for me. And so whether I am in a office room or in an emergency room helping patients, or where I am currently in terms of the pharmaceutical industry, it's still very rewarding. Being able to help patients on a much larger platform in terms of designing, implementing clinical trials, and working with health authorities to get these medicines approved is pretty exciting.
Good, good. So no major frustrations at the moment. Anyway, I'm guessing it's quite a different culture
Sure.
from academia, more hectic, perhaps.
No major frustrations. I
No,
think
good.
what I will say is that there is a difference in
Mm,
terms of the approach. Um, you are no longer, it's not just about a stethoscope, but really working with a integrated and cross-functional team. Um, the focus is always the same, which is bringing valuable medicines to patients that will ultimately help improve their lives. Um, but recognizing that you're part of a team, I think, if anything, is actually encouraging. Um, and it's very rewarding being able to learn from a lot of the folks that sit on that team that are specialized in different areas.
mm. So, talking about improving patient lives, that's a really good intro to our main topic, which is about transformative medicines. And Gilead is well known in the transformative medicine space, in oncology, but across other areas as well. Could you just say a few words about what transformative medicines are, how they're different to other medicines in oncology, and tell us a bit about Gilead's approach to transformative medicine? What makes your approach different or unique?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for the question. One of the reasons I joined Gilead was the fact that I saw a great opportunity to help patients, specifically with the evolving oncology portfolio at Gilead, and the opportunity to be able to make an impact. When we think about transformative medicines, it's really about bringing forward therapy that's really going to, as it's implied in the word, transform the standard of care. We've seen that thus far in terms of the novel targeted therapies that have evolved over time, as well as more recently immunotherapy or immuno-oncology, which has transformed the experience for patients, has transformed the experience for healthcare providers. Gilead is heavily invested and committed to continuing to move that forward in terms of developing medicines and therapies that will transform the experience for patients and also the experience for providers and how we manage some of these really, really difficult to treat diseases like cancer.
Mm. And what are some of the main challenges in bringing these transformative medicines to the marketplace and to the patient as well? Because I guess as well as being transformative, they must be disruptive in some ways because it's fundamentally new way of doing things. What are some of the big challenges you're finding in getting them to patients?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the biggest challenges in terms of developing transformative medicines, and this always comes down to, and this is, part and parcel of what we do at Gilead, is you got to follow the science. And when we think about transformative medicines, it really comes down to the science and really being able to look at fundamentally what is occurring from a biologic perspective and thinking about novel ways to target new pathways that we learn. We would like to be able to move a lot faster than we can, but we've got to understand the science. And as we understand the science, we're able to come up with more therapeutics that can actually be transformative in terms of how they affect patients and how they can actually benefit patients in terms of improving their lives. You mentioned, one of the frustrations. I think that the key frustration of any company, specifically, when we're dealing with cancer, is we want to be able to advance the science much faster than we can. We want to be able to understand these pathways much better than we currently do, because we recognize our ability to do that is really going to be the framework upon which we start to develop new therapies. And that's something that we're really invested in.
And when, as you describe here, you're doing some basic science research as well as identifying then targets and bringing that to the patient, that must involve a lot of risk. You must go down lots of pathways that ultimately lead nowhere. And how do you manage that risk? What are your approaches that you in the industry and others can take to mitigate or maybe share that risk that you're taking in developing these new and novel therapies?
Sure. And I think, part and parcel of your question in terms of managing risk is also managing cost. And how do you manage the cost of care? Um, uh, what I would say is, and I think you've touched on this a little bit, is partnership. Um, Partnership in terms of building the science upon which we can actually help patients. Part of it is partnership in terms of how we design and implement and execute clinical trials. And this includes working alongside healthcare providers as well as major institutions and government agencies. And then finally, when you think about partnerships, you think about partnerships, collaboration, and community with regards to the delivery of care. You know, CAR T is a specific example where partnership is critical with regards to how these therapies are managed, implemented, and delivered and prepared for patients as we move forward. And I think as we continue to see more novel therapies, that partnership between the academic institutions, the pharmaceutical industry, as well as healthcare providers and patients is really what's going to ultimately work towards advancing the science, reducing the cost of care, and reducing the risk that's involved in development.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that sort of collaborative side as well, because you've spoken about the risks of developing the medicines, of course, doing the basic research, bringing that through into a product. But once you've got a product, um, particularly in something like cell and gene therapy, for example, where we've seen quite a few examples recently of companies have withdrawn their therapies from the market because they're just not commercially viable. And I guess a lot of our time is because of a large upfront costs and maybe the inability of some payers to sort of work out payment schemes that can that can actually allow the delivery and the access of this care in a way that's sustainable from a financial point of view. How are you without going into commercial specifics, but are you feeling you're making good progress in discussions with payers about how you can get these obviously very expensive but very novel and very powerful therapies to patients in a sort of sustainable fashion, outcome-based payments and that kind of scheme. Is that, are you finding success? Are you
Sure,
feeling confident about that?
absolutely. And that's actually a really, really great question. We here at Gilead, just to take a step back, one of the things that's important to note that Gilead has a history of driving scientific advances that have dramatically improved patients' outcomes, both in terms of HIV, hepatitis C, and more recently with COVID-19. And this has been shouldered upon the dedication and commitment towards bringing transformative therapies. We're doing that now in oncology. Um, and this is in three major ways. One is in terms of what's referred to as tumor intrinsic cell death, which is really focusing on key pathways within cancer in order to really maximize the benefit for patients in terms of a direct effect on the cancer cell. In addition to that, we're also heavily invested in therapies that promote immune-mediated tumor killing through enhanced expansion, expression, differentiation of T cells, NK cells, as well as macrophage. And then finally, one of the other things that really are sort of sit at the cornerstone of our approach towards cancer therapy is around therapies that focus on remodeling the tumor microenvironment. When you put that all together in terms of the history of Gilead and in terms of scientific advances in other therapeutic areas, the approach that we're taking specifically with around cancer therapy, and the goal towards partnership, a lot of this actually comes together that helps to specifically not only reduce the risk, but also provides a very novel approach that touches upon the high unmet need that patients have with regards to cancer. And so that's really been our approach. And it's a way in which we think that we're actually going to be, as we sort of look forward to the future, a way that we think we're actually going to be able to bring really, really effective therapies for patients in this space.
And on that question of partnership, with some of these transformational therapies, um, it is it really does need partnership, doesn't it? Because a lot of the time you might find yourself working with hospital and other providers group is not a pill that you sell to the provider who then delivers care, but rather you genuinely have to make partnerships with hospital groups. um, and I suppose, do you also keep in contact with patients as well? I mean, how far down the chain of care delivery does your partnership working go? Does it go down to provider, or do you work with patients as well who are receiving the care? I don't know that.
Another great question. I think partnership is critical for the success of any company, but more importantly, for us to really be able to make a true advancement in cancer care. And this is something that, as I mentioned earlier, at Gilead has been a cornerstone, not only that has led to the success that the company has had in managing, very, very challenging diseases such as HIV, hepatitis C, COVID-19, but more specifically with cancer. When we think about partnership, it goes all the way down to the patient. It starts with the patient and it ends with the patient. It starts with the patient in terms of partnerships with academic communities to better understand cancer biology and develop novel and interesting pathways that ultimately lead to development of transformative medicines. It starts with a partnership with regards to a lot of the health authorities in terms of thinking about and designing new and innovative clinical trials that can be run smarter, faster, more efficient, that will decrease the timeline that it takes for these medicines when they are developed from a translational perspective to when we're actually able to get these medicines into the hands of physicians to treat patients. And then ultimately it comes back to the patient again when you think about the patients, patient advocacy groups to really better understand that once this medicine is approved and available, what is the actual experience that patients have with this medicine? And so when we think about collaborations and partnerships, ultimately we want to continue to improve upon the experience for patients. And what this means is a partnership that not only begins with patients, but ends with patients in terms of finding out what is their experience with the currently available medicines, how we can continue to improve their experience, not only in terms of the medicines that we develop, but how we can also improve their experience in participating in a lot of our clinical trials.
I mean, it really is a different model, isn't it, from maybe our understanding of traditional pharma who creates the tools that then is on the shelf for a provider to either use or not use, whereas you are really embedded all the way along that sort of chain through providers and patients. You mentioned COVID very briefly earlier. How did Gilead sort of respond to the COVID pandemic, and is there anything that you in the oncology space of Gilead are sort of learning from the COVID response in your company?
Absolutely. I think Gilead responded, and it gets back to maybe one of the questions you asked me earlier about what excites me about working at a company like Gilead, is the response that Gilead had in the COVID-19 pandemic, which was one in which starts with the patient, ends with the patient. During the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the things Gilead did was really leverage the science, the technology that we had previously in terms of our understanding of virology through hepatitis C and HIV to really bring forward a very transformative medicine to combat COVID-19. And I think that is also exemplary across the board in terms of how Gilead has approached not only virology, but also areas of immunology and inflammation. In oncology, I think this is even more so when we have to think about how COVID-19 has impacted our ability to, or for our ability to run clinical trials, and more importantly, how COVID-19 has impacted cancer patients. For a lot of cancer patients, that relationship, that connection with their physician is important, it's critical. For a lot of people, when you think about cancer, I mean, a lot of the survival that's attached to early detection and prevention, a lot of this has been impacted through the COVID-19 pandemic. What I can say for Gilead and what we've learned as a company is that as much as we can be relevant, agile, and bring forward novel and transformative therapies, even in the face of crises with regards to COVID-19. We're able to do the same thing with regards to cancer therapy. Now, it does mean that we have to think very differently about how we connect with patients. We've seen the advent of the use of digital technology for patients to access their providers. But more importantly, what it means for us as a company is that we can use a lot more of the technologies that are existing today as a result of this to further development in oncology. And as I mentioned earlier, ultimately we have to be able to design trials better, have them run more efficiently, faster, reduce the timelines with regards to drug development to ultimately get that to patients sooner. And we've seen
Yeah.
that with COVID-19, we've learned that. And that ability to transform and use and be agile in development to bring forward transformative therapies quicker, faster, sooner, that's something that we're certainly embracing in the oncology group.
Yeah, I'd be really interesting to see how that turns out. It's been a very interesting time for trial development and innovation over COVID for all the obvious reasons. We're very nearly out of time, which has gone by so very quickly. I actually had sort of two wrap-up questions, so we might go a minute or so over, but that's fine. I was going to ask, first one of the two wrap-up questions is, what one or two changes could providers or payers make today in order to support the adoption of and improve access to transformational therapies? What would you like to see payers and providers do? Any
I
thoughts?
think gets back to your original question about partnership. I don't necessarily think there are one or two things that they need to change, but I think there's always the opportunity for improvement. I think improving or expanding communication is going to be important between the pharmaceutical industries, the payers, the providers, to better understand what are the needs for the patient. I think it's important that we have or at least build a system and continue to improve upon a system that recognizes and rewards innovation in areas of high unmet need. We at Gilead, when we think about development and particularly about bringing forward transformative medicines for patients with cancer, it's really about the unmet need. We're not in the interest of developing therapies for the sake of developing therapies, but really bringing forth therapies that are going to fundamentally change the lives of cancer patients. And that starts with the unmet need. I think in addition to that, we want, one of the things that could also help when we think about a lot of the various stakeholders throughout Europe and across the healthcare system, it's going to be a willingness to have flexibility with regards to delivery of care and how we think about new therapies.
Very interesting. Identification of need and a very early, again, you come back time and time again to partnership, and that's very interesting. I'd like to talk more about that, but another time. Final question, and we just got 30 seconds or so, if that's okay. What are your predictions for 5 years from now? How do you think the transformational therapies that you're developing today might have changed the lives of patients?
Wow, you saved the big question for last.
Sorry.
um, if I had to think about my predictions, and I'm not good, I'm not sure how good I am at predicting, but I think what we're trying to accomplish at Gilead. When I look at our oncology program and our portfolio, it's in an incredible growth phase right now. Um, and we're working towards building a formidable oncology portfolio that I'm really optimistic is going to bring a lot of value towards patients. We talked a lot about today about partnerships and collaborations. And so I believe, wholeheartedly that it's not just about our pipeline that we're trying to build in oncology, but it's really going to be the outcomes of those collaborations. Um, and really, the team that we're putting together to help make the pipeline, the promise, a reality in terms of medicines for patients that bring value. So if I look forward into the future, I think the things I predict for Gilead is a deeper, stronger connection with the oncology community and with patients and with providers, and a portfolio that, as you look across all the various areas of unmet need, a portfolio that brings true value and transformative care to patients. We're doing that now, but I'm really excited about what that's going to look like in the future.
Great. Well, we are beyond out of time, but thank you, Leighton, again for that. Look forward to seeing your predictions come true. Partnerships, partnerships, partnerships. And I'd like to say, thank you for giving us the time to come and talk to us today. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much to the audience for listening. And take care and goodbye.